Welcome to Behind the Smile with Ash Butterss, a podcast designed to reveal the truth behind the masks we wear. Together, we look to demystify the human mind and its behaviours in relation to mental health, trauma and addiction. My name's Ash and I'll be your host as we uncover the real stories of people's pain and the steps they've taken to live a life of freedom in recovery. From sobriety to spirituality, join me each week as we uncover the reasons why people seek recovery and how their lives have changed by living one day at a time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. Today's guest is Mandy Manners. Mandy is a certified life and recovery coach who specializes in addiction recovery. Along with this, she is also a wellbeing coach, an author, a speaker, and an activist who advocates for sobriety and mental health. Mandy made the decision to get sober for the final time on the 17th of August, 2017, after years of dipping in and out of sobriety. Her story is so relatable, and I'm beyond grateful that she's joining us here today. So without further delay, dialing in from France, I'd love to introduce Mandy onto the show. Mandy, welcome to Behind the Smile. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to dive into the, complex story of recovery.
And that's it. How are you today? It's early morning over there for you, isn't it?
Yeah, 10 in the morning. I'm good. I've done my first sort of morning things, get the kids to school, dog walked, and now to work. So yeah, I'm good.
Brilliant. Well, before we dive into the photo that I've asked you to bring along today, I would love for our audience to get to know a little bit more about you. So could we start off with you telling us where you're from originally, where you live now, what your average day looks like, and what do you do for fun?
So I am 42. I had to think about that. And I'm originally from the UK, from England. I grew up I've moved around quite a lot. So I was born in Suffolk and then spent most of my sort of teenage life in the West Country, and then did my studies in Brighton and then lived in London. So I've moved around quite a lot. I'm now in France. I'm on the West Coast, so about an hour south of La Rochelle, 2 hours from Bordeaux, so very much the wine country of France, which is not at all problematic. And I've been here for 16 years. So I moved here when I was pregnant with my daughter, who will be 16 on Sunday. Yeah, on the 4th.
Wow.
So average day, well, part of my story is kind of circles of burnout, which has been kind of quite present in the last couple of years. So my average day is a lot less full than it was about 6 months ago, because I stepped back from quite a lot of projects that I was involved in just because I recognised that I was not doing very well. So average day at the moment is clients, my one-to-one clients basically is my primary focus, and making sure I cook some food for me and the kids, walk the dog, mess around on Instagram for probably too long, do some reading. I'm always doing a course of some sort. So I'm doing an integrative fusion therapeutic coaching course at the moment. So I do a bit of study. I've just finished a trauma-informed coaching certificate. So that was 52 hours of live training. So
Wow.
So that's, I think,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, really fascinating. With a woman called Lula Benz, who's a friend of mine, and I kind of helped her to a little bit with facilitating and kind of the workbooks and facilitating that sort of stuff. So I was a teacher, a professor at university before I became a coach. So I do train coaches for the coaching academy. So that's another part of my work. I told you I was keeping it taking things off the list. Yeah. And what do I do for fun? I like to watch movies with the kids. I like to hang out with friends. I like to swim, go to yoga, do a puzzle, paint. Very different to how life was before. A lot of resting. That's my kind of favourite thing, is, going in the bath, listening to an audiobook. I think my main focus through my recovery and certainly the second part of my recovery has been, safety, connection with self, resting, nervous system regulation, all of that kind of that stuff. Yeah.
So important, isn't it? I think when we come from our previous lives where we're just constantly running on adrenaline and we're in these really big highs and low lows and everything's extreme, just to be able to come back to that constant can actually be really difficult. I think for me, I've had to really train myself to be able to
100%. Yeah, I think it's the thing that I work most with clients on, because we live in a state of hypervigilance. Either it's through trauma, or it's through chronic stress, or it's through just the incredibly focused, success-driven society we live in. So many of us are managing so many different things, and alcohol, drugs, or whatever becomes that part of that coping strategy to just manage. And so rather than kind of leaving people empty with nothing to self-soothe or to manage that, it's all about resourcing. And for me, that's been, is my life's work, really. Be that boundaries, or be that, nutrition, or just saying no, or whatever, it's a process. It's not a destination. It's but just, yeah.
And it all plays a role, doesn't it? I think that was one of the biggest things when I started this podcast. It's a recovery podcast, but we don't just talk about drinking or drugs or that sort of realm. It's everything. It's everything that plays into that. It's meditation, it's diet, nutrition, like you said, it's relationships, looking at things like codependency. There are so many different facets that contribute to people that end up being addicted to substances. Yeah, big topic. Alrighty, well, I would love to dive into our photo now. So I've asked you, Mandy, to bring in a photo with you today, and it's a photo from a time in your life when you were hiding behind a smile. So you were projecting one version of yourself to the world, but the reality was that you were really struggling on the inside. So for our listeners who can't see this photo right now, could you describe what's going on for you in the photo, and also what was happening for you at that time in your life?
Yeah, so this photo is actually one that's up in my parents' house. So it's interesting that it's often reflected as a picture where I look really pretty and really kind of serene. So I'm wearing, a nice pink top, and I'm kind of looking at the camera. I look quite relaxed. I've got my hair's long, it's down. I'm sat at, a table with a big glass of rosé and ice. And it was actually my birthday. So it's my birthday 2017, so just before I quit for the final time. And my brothers and so I was living in France. My brothers I've got two brothers, they live in the UK. We decided to surprise my dad for his birthday. So my birthday is a week before his birthday. My dad had recently been diagnosed with cancer, colon cancer, which he's now clear of, which is, amazing. So the idea was right, let's take him out, let's take him to dinner, and, and we'll have this really nice time, and it'll be really special, and just cheer him up and know that we're there for him, etc. And this is kind of in my period of moderate drinking. So I'd done a year of sobriety between 2013 and 14, and then I'd kind of been back and forth. I got really drunk that night, blackout drunk. I don't remember going to bed, and I was so hungover in that picture. And what was going on in my head was just that wasn't the way that I wanted to show up for Dad. Is that what we do? Is that how we process pain? Is that my only way? And am I still here, in this place of doing this again, and feeling so ashamed of myself, and feeling I thought I'd cracked it, but here I am back again. And there was a big kind of core thing with me, kind of knowing that I had a problem with drinking, was the fact that I had this understanding that if something really, really bad happens in my life, I wouldn't have the capacity to cope. so I managed my drinking. I'd never hit rock bottom. I'm doing a lot of inverted comments here. I'd managed to, like, it looked okay on the outside, but it was always a kind of dance with the devil. It was always like luck, a lot of luck, and so I could say, this whole thing of, well, I'm not an alcoholic, I'm not that bad, and I'd seen people that bad, and that wasn't me, and all of this kind of narrative of why I should keep alcohol in my life, but also knowing in the back of my head, like, if something had happened with my kids, for example, I would be gone. Like I would be all of those things. I would hit rock bottom. I know 100, and still that's one of the things that keeps me sober, right, is like, I cannot take that risk, because that's my only, like, I'm on 95% absolutely secure in my sobriety, other than that 5% that if something so traumatic happens, I don't know whether I could bring myself back. And so it was just that kind of being in that space of just going, right, is this how I show up to my pain? Is this what I do? And I don't want to do that. I don't want that to be my story. I don't want, I'd had a lot of pain, and I'd had a lot of trauma, and I hadn't had the capacity to deal with a lot of it. And yeah, so it was the beginning of the end, basically. It was just from that moment onwards, I drank through the summer, as you do, well, not as everyone does, but, which was the pattern. As soon as the summer comes, there's no rules, and also living in Europe, there's a lot of day drinking, drinking in the evening, aperitif, etc. Yeah, and it kind of it went down from that point, and until I kind of quit in August of that year. So yeah, it's an interesting picture, because a lot of people think, oh, look, she looks so pretty and she's so happy. And I know behind, I was like, I'm struggling here.
The reality of what was going on inside. And I think you touched on such an important point around how alcohol not only does it numb us out, but it stops us from being able to be there for other people. So if you were there that weekend for your dad, but then we end up drinking, which automatically disconnects us, and then the next day we're hungover. I remember that was such a big part of my story, and I would always have so much regret, and I'd always feel really empty after spending time with my family and my friends, as opposed to now in recovery, where I leave situations or experiences with a really full heart, because I'm able to be completely present when I am there.
Yeah, and also that we were, and also that we were encouraging him, in a fragile kind of, illness to drink too, so it's just, there were so many things about it that it didn't align with who I wanted to be as a person.
For sure. Mandy, can you tell me a little bit about your childhood? What were you like growing up as a child?
Yeah, it depends who you ask. I think I have a different answer to this than perhaps my parents, but for me, I was quite scared as a kid. I'm a typical Gemini, basically. So there's two sides. So there's part of me that was really confident and like doing dancing and like performing in front of everybody. And then there was the other side of me who was, scared of the dark and had nightmares and was very attached to my parents, quite worried about the world. Yeah, I had lots of friends, but I never felt like I was good enough. I was always trying to be more. I didn't ever really feel like I'd figured out who I was. So I was always like searching for confirmation of that from other people or being cool or whatever that is. So yeah, I'd say I was a pretty confused little kid. Like I was very imaginative. I loved playing with, making up stories and, playing in the garden. And then I was a teenager, and I think like I pushed myself to grow up really quickly through taking loads of drugs and drinking, basically. I think if I really, really honest about it.
So was there much alcohol in your family home as you were growing up? Or what was it that gave you the idea to maybe be drawn to that as a way of escaping or as a way of being able to grow up faster?
Yeah, I mean, my parents drink. I wouldn't say either of them have a problematic relationship with alcohol, but it's certainly part of our social kind of makeup as a family. So there was always alcohol around. And I do remember not really liking how it changed people when I was a kid, at Christmas or, special occasions, everyone would get a bit silly and I wouldn't like that. But it's so much part of British culture that, we would go to the pub for Sunday lunch or, everyone was drinking, it was very normal just as a young person to kind of go to the park and with a bottle of cider and drink when you were kind of, 13, 14. It was just, that was what we did.
Yeah. And so tell me more about what that looked like for you at that time in terms of the drinking. Do you remember at what age you were when you first started drinking, and how did that look different from your peers, those around you who were also maybe drinking?
I had one friend who I was very drawn to people whose lives were a bit difficult. I think I don't know, maybe I wanted to be there for them, or I found it exciting, or maybe that I felt something internally in me that didn't feel right. So I was drawn to other people that were kind of, finding life a bit complicated. So I had one friend, and her parents were divorced, and, her mum was dating a very young guy, and, and basically we could just do what we want. So, that was really young, like 12. We would kind of just take stuff from the drinks cabinet and drink it and see what happened, basically. And I didn't really like it. I never really liked the effect of alcohol because it made me out of control, and I didn't really like that. And I didn't really like it. When I was kind of 15, 16, we would go out and sort of drink white wine and, go out on a Friday night, and I'd get really angry, start fights with people, and I was super protective of my friends. So even at that age, I stopped drinking white wine when I was 15 because I knew that it didn't make me into a nice person. So, that's why I probably sort of enjoyed drugs. We started taking ecstasy and then cocaine kind of probably by the age of 17. And I think I felt more comfortable in with those drugs because I had a level of control, and so alcohol really only became kind of, I was drinking all the time throughout my kind of teens and my 20s, but it only became kind of center stage when I became a mum and, was living in France and had that kind of romanticized idea of, alcohol being precious and, attractive rather than just something you did to get drunk, which was, I would have drank anything when I was a kid. I didn't care. I just wanted the effect. But also I stopped doing drugs, because I was a mom and it's illegal and you don't do that. And then alcohol just ruined me, basically. So,
yeah. We'll come back to the move to France, but I'd love to just take a step back into, so you, around your mid-teen years, the drinking was starting to accelerate. And then I've read about your story where you went to Mexico in your late teens and you had quite a traumatic experience. Do you feel comfortable sharing what happened there, and how do you think it contributed to the acceleration of your addiction later on in life?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I had a chat with a friend of mine who, because we were really quite rebellious at that point, all of us. So I was 18, and we were doing a lot of drugs and going to raves and festivals and just quite away from any normal behaviour as young people. And I said to a friend of mine, one of my best mates, before we left, I said, I got a really bad feeling about Mexico. And I don't remember this. I don't remember very much about the next 2 years of my life, but, maybe I had a bit of a sixth sense about it. And I remember kind of because I don't even remember why we ended up going. I mean, initially we were going to go to South Africa, and then it switched to Mexico. And I remember being on the plane and reading that Mexico City was the most dangerous city in the world. And I was like, oh, it's just like, what do we do? It's like we're both 18, two young girls. And so we arrived, and in Mexico City, there was a couple of things that were a bit dangerous. We were staying in a hotel with the Mexican basketball team, and we were drinking with them, and quite luckily we got so drunk on tequila we passed out, because we were supposed to go out clubbing with them, and we woke up and they kind of knocked on our door and were like, what happened? And we were like, oh, sorry. It's just we had no conscious awareness of our safety. We were on a bus and someone threw a brick through the window. It's just like we were traveling, and they came on and kind of robbed the bus with guns. It was just, there was a lot going on, and I think probably because we didn't know any better, and I don't know, but yeah, we weren't looking after ourselves. And so it ended up we were in a kind of town on the coastline, and I remember sort of we were drinking with these guys, and we'd been kind of chatting with them quite a lot. We were going to go to some caves with them, and I remember sitting in the car and seeing some sort of like a porn kind of cartoon magazine in the car, and I was just like, not sure about this. So we kind of got out, and everyone's allowed to, I don't know, I guess I just had a feeling about what we were doing. Yeah. And so we were drinking, and I still don't know whether I was drugged or whether it's the disassociation that I don't remember, or a combination of the two. But certainly I remember thinking, this is mezcal, or this is cloudy tequila kind of thing. So it ended up that we were staying in these kind of beach huts on the beach, and a group of men broke into the beach hut that we were staying in, and attacked me, and and there was, from what I can remember, which is very little, or I've blocked out, there was 3 guys that sexually assaulted me and kind of beat me up, and that's taken a very long time to be able to say that out loud. And I fully disassociated. So if people are listening, and I think it's so important to talk about disassociation. Disassociation is our amazing body's way of kind of keeping us alive through extreme trauma. So what happens is essentially you leave your body. So people might feel like they're in a dream, or they might feel like they're looking down upon themselves. And actually what's going on is the body is taking away, disassociating from the event in order to decrease the adrenaline levels in the body, because otherwise you'd have a heart attack, or you would go into cardiac arrest. So essentially your body goes into extreme freeze, shutdown, and you have this sensation that you're not in your body, and that allows you to feel safe, to stay alive. And I didn't know that for a very, very long time. And I didn't talk to anyone about what happened for over 10 years. And so I spent 10 years going, did it happen? Did it happen? Did it happen? Did I dream it? Did it happen? And I used to think about it every single day, on the way to work, when I went to bed, ask, did it happen? Did I make it up? Was it a thing? Even though I'd had physical signs afterwards, I said to my best mate who I was with, I don't ever want to talk about this again. Bless her, she held that, for over 10 years, but I had no one to ask. So I had no, and then I don't really remember much about the next kind of 6 months of my life. So it was pretty life-changing, in the sense that because I shut down so much about it, and I had so many unanswered questions. I built up a lot of shame that it was my fault, that I shouldn't have been drinking, that, that I'd done something wrong, that I was too cocky and I was annoying, and that, I'd created this situation. And then I'd convinced myself that I'd made it up and that actually it didn't happen and I was just trying to get attention and, you know, all of these different things, and all of it was in my head, you know, all was constantly sort of, even though like from anyone outside, because, you know, it was like, of course, it was only when my husband we met when I was 22, you know, who would be like, of course, you know, it's obvious that, you know, it's impacted every sexual relationship I've had since, but I couldn't, I was just so disconnected from it. Yeah, and I think from then on, I mean, I just didn't really care about myself. So in terms of my addiction, I was just like, I've done, you know, it's my fault. I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have done that. So I don't care about myself anymore. And led to more kind of mistakes or, you know, behaviour I wish that hadn't happened. I mean, I got pregnant, like I had a one night stand with a really good friend, like the night before I went to university, you know, didn't go and get the morning after pill because it was a bank holiday and there wasn't anyone where to go. So then didn't do anything about it and ended up, you know, having to have a late abortion, you know, because I hadn't, you know, I was just so lost at that time. So it's like trauma upon trauma, you know, as these things tend to happen. Yeah.
Absolutely, Mandy. Just firstly, I want to say thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing that part of your story with us. I know it would not be easy, and it's just so powerful to hear people talk about these topics, which are so often, you know, people don't feel comfortable or they're not ready. And I do feel honoured that you were able to share that with us. So thank you for that. Can I ask, do you see a direct correlation from that experience into the acceleration of the drinking and using? I know that you said your behaviours started to accelerate, but was there a direct link to the drinking at that time?
Yeah. And obviously this is a lot of unpacking, lots of therapy and all of the things to, you know, to be able to put all these dots together. But because the event happened at night, you know, I still have sleep issues. They're a lot better now, but, you know, I had extreme hypervigilance in terms of falling asleep. I had periods of kind of OCD behavior where I would just fall asleep, then wake bob kind of upright and then go and check all the locks around the house. And that happened much later. I mean, you know, once I'd had kids and we'd moved and, you know, it would come up in different ways. So I certainly started using alcohol as a sleep aid. You know, it was I would knock myself out. And, you know, and that was pretty much standard for the next kind of 10 years, really. So in terms of it becoming part of my way of coping with life, 100%. And I think once you're in that sort of state of it becoming something that you need to survive and exist, then it's taken on a whole different, you know, level. And I mean, those years were so lost that it was all mixed up with kind of, you know, drugs, etc. But when I had my daughter, so, you know, fast forward to kind of when I was 26, that triggered a lot of the trauma, because all of a sudden I had this little girl that I loved more than anything, and how was I going to keep her safe, and how could I show up to be a good mom, and how could I, you know, so that like heightened all that hypervigilance. And, you know, that's certainly when my drinking really became problematic, was when I became a mum. A, because I'd stopped doing, you know, other things, but B, because I was extremely traumatized by that sense of responsibility. And
I imagine the sense of fear that just would have been overwhelming.
Utter fear, yeah. And, you know, it would come out in lots of different ways. So I would, you know, I had real issues with rage when they were little, you know, and I'd get really angry or really lose it. And, you know, it was all fear-based. It was just like I couldn't cope. You know, them jumping off the sofa, I'd just go like from 0 to 20 in, you know, a second, because it was just so that absolutely kind of was the catalyst to me really losing that connection with myself, which was little anyway, you know. Both, I mean, if you really dive into my family history, there is, you know, mental health issues on both sides. There is, you know, trauma on both sides of my parents, you know, there is, so you can see that they were trying their best, and perhaps some of the ways that, you know, our family unit was complicated, you know. So there was a thin connection with myself as a kid, but I was very, very loved. And so, you know, that's, I guess, how I've managed to always find my way back out, was because I had that sort of core sense of resilience. But yeah, I mean, it got pretty dark for a while there. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you met your husband when you were 22.
Yeah.
And did that coincide with the move to France?
Well, we met in the UK. We lived together for about 5 years in the UK. And again, that was a kind of like, because he's French and because French culture is so sort of around wine being an integral part of your life, I had this real, you know, mix of that binge drinking kind of culture and all the traumatic drinking, and then this daily drinking as part of like our life and our relationship. And I think a lot of people had that and do have that, because certainly wine drinking has become part of our kind of social, connectivity. And wine is actually really strong as an alcohol, right? And so our relationship kind of was pretty boozy, you know, in the early years. And he still drinks now. We have a wine cellar in our house. That's fine. It doesn't bother me at all. You know, and he doesn't drink in the same way that we used to before we had kids. But yeah, it was definitely kind of really difficult to give up on that sense, you know, because it was so much part of our relationship. But yeah, no, we lived together in Brighton for like 5 years, and then we wanted to have kids and we couldn't afford it. So I was like, oh no, let's move to France. I was working in kind of marketing and had quite a stressful job, and was like, that would be a good new plan. And then my husband couldn't find a job. So I was like, okay, let's stay here and let's have a baby. And then he got a job and I was 3 months pregnant. So we moved when I was 3 months pregnant, and then was like, oh,
wow.
Yeah.
And so you've mentioned before that this was around the time you became sober curious. So can you tell me a little bit more about that time within your life? Was that sparked because you were pregnant and there was that 9 months of almost forced sobriety, or had you been thinking about it prior to falling pregnant?
A bit of both. Because we'd been kind of, you know, been drinking quite heavily. I'd put on quite a lot of weight. I wasn't feeling great about myself. My husband and I decided to like do a year without drinking. And his sister is a lifelong teetotaler. She just doesn't like it, which I just thought was the most astounding thing I'd ever seen or heard, you know. And she's this,
my mind.
Yeah, she was like, you know, had a really good job in Paris. You know, she's this beautiful, you know, blonde, not that it matters, but, you know, she just read loads of books, you know, went to festivals, kind of showed a normal functioning life, but she just drank tea. So I just thought that was so unbelievably glamorous and amazing. So yeah, we stopped drinking just to kind of help us with our health and check in with ourselves, I think. And I loved it. I just really enjoyed that different life of kind of getting up on a Saturday morning and going to the farmer's market and buying nice food and just never being hungover. I just really enjoyed sort of connecting with my partner in a way that wasn't, you know, partying. And then I got pregnant. And so I didn't drink at all. And I think I could have carried on really, but I just never considered it at that point. And then I remember when I got home from the hospital with my daughter, I was given like a really nice glass of wine, and it just like calmed all the stress. And that was it really. It was pretty problematic from that moment on, you know, even when breastfeeding and things like that. There's a lot of things I wish I hadn't done, at that time.
But I suppose it was that familiarity of having that coping mechanism that you works.
Yeah. So there's nothing I can do about that time. So just have to be really kind to myself and remember that I was struggling. I was a wounded person, and I did the best with what I could at the time. I didn't know any better at the time. No one had ever talked to me about trauma. I didn't have any support. I hadn't had any therapy. I hadn't had any medication, probably been depressed my whole life, so like I can only like try and, show up as the best mum I can now, and, and keep learning, really.
Absolutely. And so how many years was it before, and now I'm using air quotes, the crash that you speak about, that period of 2010 to 2013 where you were experiencing panic attacks and depression? Can you tell me more about that and what led up to that?
Yeah, so I had my daughter in 2006, my son in 2008, so they're 19 months apart, and I found the transition from one child to two children, really difficult. And again, I was just really struggling in thinking that I wasn't doing a good job. And then I thought, and intellectually, I thought I wanted to be a stay-at-home mum. And then as a stay-at-home mum, I just really struggled with not feeling nourished intellectually. So I went back to work, and it kind of went from maybe I could do a couple of classes to, getting pretty much 3/4 of the week, so about 20-25 hours teaching in a prestigious kind of university, teaching in a business school. And then from there, I kind of did really well, really quickly in my job, and got offered, a permanent faculty place at the university. So, was teaching full time, but also had, I was the first year coordinator. So I was coordinating 30 teachers over 2 campuses, rewriting the whole of the first year program. Absolutely loved it. Loved being in front of the students, felt young again, felt like I, meant something. And had loads of friends. So it's I'd gone from this place of I don't know what I'm doing, I'm a stay-at-home mum and this is really hard, to this feels, back to me. That's what it felt like, back to me. And part of that back to me was going to the bar with my colleagues after work. So we'd have our day, and then it'd be let's go for a beer. And some of those people have now had to really reassess their drinking too, right? So we kind of met this perfect storm of kind of mates, and it was talking about music and going to festivals, and we were acting like we were 18 again, seeing the students hey, we were the cool teachers, and so from that point, I mean, Belgian beer is very strong. So you'd be going to the bar and having 3 pints of very strong beer. And then I'd be going home, to get the kids. And then putting the kids to bed. My husband worked away a lot, so I was often on my own. And because it was a corporate business school, I'd be in heels and a suit. So I'd it was just looking back, I'd take the kids to school. I was exhausted by the time I started the day, basically, 2 kids under 5, get them to nursery, school, then in my heels, run to work, teach all day, standing up, animating, giving them my best. And then, going for a couple of drinks with my colleagues, then running back to get the kids in my heels, then feeding them, answering their needs, putting them in bed, and then sink in a chair, glass of wine. And that's what became the routine, so it went from drinking, problematically binge drinking, when I went back to England or when it was a big night, to drinking after work, then drinking when the kids gone to bed on my own, a bottle of red wine, not eating because, of course, like who would eat when you could save the calories for wine? And
yep. And so when did the panic attacks start?
So then around that time, so I wasn't sleeping at all. So I would kind of knock myself out with alcohol, and then wake up at like 4 a.m, in a panic attack, and then like panic attacks at work, and just getting more and more overwhelmed, more and more burnt out. And then I went to a music festival with a friend of mine, and we took something, I don't know what it was, but it was a lot stronger than we thought it was. And I woke up in the kind of A&E tent, not remembering how I got there, as a 30-year-old, because I had my kids young, all of the 30 birthdays and all of the weddings and things like that were happening when I got 2 small kids. So I'd like leave them with my husband and then go away on these crazy kind of party weekends. Yeah, and so I had that scare, and then so I was like, right, I'm going to stop everything. And looking now, I know that I probably went into withdrawal because I was hallucinating and shaking, and that's when I wrote it all down for my husband. I was like, I need you to take me to the doctor. But I need you to come because I can't explain everything. So I wrote down everything. I wrote down, because I was pretty suicidal. I was pretty, lost. Like I was scared of everything. So my husband had to go and read this to the doctor, which is quite intense. But, well, it is what it is, really. And luckily my doctor was a addiction counsellor, as well as a paediatrician, as well as a
Wow.
Cognitive behavior.
CBT.
There we go.
Yeah.
So he pretty much saved my life, really. So he was like, right,
a bit of a God job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So I started going to see him like 2 hours twice a week. I go and see with him. He put me on antidepressants, and never really talked about my drinking at that time, to be honest. It was around all the survival state I was in, really. And it was only through that kind of experience that I realised that actually alcohol probably wasn't helping the situation.
So was that around the time that you started doing your own work from a psychology standpoint, really working through that trauma and unpacking everything?
Yeah, and we weren't even really talking about the trauma then, to be honest. That happened later. At that time, it was really just the burnout. It was the depression. It was, coping with motherhood, and getting my kind of a joy of life back, and managing and a lot of work around kind of, my values and who I wanted to be as a person. And he was just incredibly helpful because, that non-judgmental lens that he was just like, look, like all the stuff that you were doing when you were 18, 20, it's fine. Just, okay, it was a bit risky, but that's what you do, it's like pushing the boundaries. It's like, now you're 30, you're a mum of 2. It's not what you want to do. It's not, this isn't the right, this is a transition period. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't have to be this person anymore. It's like permission to go, you've done enough raving and taking drugs, like you can stop that now. And that's about as far as we got, really. And through that, I was like, okay, maybe I could stop drinking or try and stop drinking. But I couldn't at that point. So it took a bit longer before I could get there.
Yeah, and so can you tell me about that time then? Because you've been sober for over 5 years now. What made the last time the very last time?
I think I'd done a lot of work. So by that point, you know, I'd been back and forth. I'd done a year, so I'd learned a lot about life without alcohol. So I had some kind of muscle memory around it. I had, you know, I was on medication, was going to therapy, had started trauma work. So I was kind of looking after myself at a different level. And then we were on holiday in Spain and my son jumped in the swimming pool and hit his head. And like we'd never drank with the kids in the pool. And I just sat down and we were like, they're doing really well. You know, yeah, maybe let's just have a glass of wine. We'd sit right next to the pool. We don't have to get in. We'll sit next to the pool. And I literally was there with a glass of wine in my hand, about to take a sip. And he jumped in, banged his head, blood everywhere. He's fine. He just cut his eye. But it was just that culmination of things was just like, whoa. And I'd been struggling that summer. I'd been drinking every day and it was just boring. It was so boring to like wake up at 4 a.m. again and have a hangover. I was so done with it. And I think it was just that kind of like, what is it going to take? You know, like when am I gonna, how many more chances am I going to take basically? And so I kind of woke and I was like, if I wake up again at 4 a.m, that's it, I'm done. And I did. So I was like, okay, that's it. And I downloaded Annie Grace's, at that time she had like a 4-day challenge or something, workshop free. And I did that for 4 days and that was enough. I mean, I'd read so much at that point and everything. Yeah, and thank goodness.
Yeah, that's incredible. Can I ask, and just circling back to the antidepressants and the medication for a moment, it's not something that we've spoken about a lot on the podcast yet, but it's part of my story as well. I went on anti-anxiety medication, which is also an antidepressant, about 2 years before I gave up drinking. And it was really interesting because for me, and I've since learned that when you drink on this particular medication, it essentially neutralizes the effect anyway. And so I was just in this cycle of anxiety and daily drinking. And but I know that for the short periods of time where I wasn't drinking, it really helped me. And I stayed on that medication for another 12 months after getting sober until I felt like I was well enough to start trying to do life again without that additional support. Can you tell me a little bit more about how it's played a role within your life?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still on antidepressants now, and I have no inclination to come off them, to be honest. I kind of see them as part of my sober toolkit. Maybe there'll be a moment where I do, but certainly experience has shown that there was a really strong narrative in my head that, you know, I needed to be fixed. I needed to fix myself. And so, you know, I would stop drinking and then I'd be like, right, okay, you know, I'm feeling a lot better. 3 months later, 4 months later, okay, yeah, you know, I must work myself off my medication because, you know, that's what I must do. And then I'd do that and then something would twitch in my head and I'd be drinking again. And like, you know, this is my story. I don't know about other people, but certainly for me, it's always helped just to build a bridge with my mental health, and I'm fine with that. You know, I'm fine. And yeah, and I definitely saw the difference of when I wasn't on them and when I was, you know, and yeah, maybe one day I'll stop taking them, but I don't have any particularly bad, I'm lucky, I don't have any side effects, and I just kind of think, you know, even if it's a placebo, it's like, that's fine. You know, I just, whatever keeps me sober is good with me, really.
That's exactly right. And I'm so glad you shared that and that it's a different experience to my own, because it's such an important example that no two journeys are the same. So it's really important that we all treat our individual recovery journeys the way that we need to, with our own research, our own support systems, our own toolkits. Now, Mandy, I recently read something that you wrote about shame. You said, I can tell the whole truth because I no longer live in shame. I no longer fear what I cannot change, and I no longer wish I was different. Now, this is such a powerful message of strength. I'd love to know, how did you get to this place where you were able to let go of the shame that you've been carrying for all these years throughout your addiction?
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of that, I've got to say. I was like, did I write that? Good on me. A little moment of genius. Yeah, I think letting go of shame is like the key. Well, part of it is doing trauma recovery work and working as a trauma-informed coach, in the sense that I learned about parts. So I learned that, we are not our thoughts, and we are not always our experience. Like, that was a part of me. Everything that happened was a part of me. It was an adapted part of me that was, surviving or creating chaos in a way that was all that they knew at the time. So part of it was kind of identifying, who I was at that person, and really connecting with that person. Like, okay, I was a teenager, so that adapted part of me as a teenager, what was going on for them? What did they know? What didn't they know at the time? What would I tell them now if I could, and how can I just love on them really hard and tell them that I'm really sorry, that they were struggling. And so, and as a kid, okay, so how old was that part of me? Okay. And what was going on for them then? And what did they know? And what didn't they know? And what would I like to say to them now? And just really kind of working through every one of those shame stories that I had, and really just holding space for that part of me, and just going, right, okay, And would you do that now? No, of course you wouldn't, sweetheart, talking kindly to that part of me. Like, it's okay, it's just what it was. And yeah, there's regret, and that's okay, because that means that you've learned from it, and you don't want to do the same things. And I think it's just that work of being a nurturing parent to yourself, and just, really showing up for yourself, and holding that space for that experience, and just going, what, it's all right, it's okay, and talking about it too, and not from the wound, but from the scar, right? From a space of being healed from it. Yeah, and I mean, it was a long process, but as soon as I started saying it out loud, whether it was to a therapist or to my journal or to, another person in recovery, it just lost its power a little bit, because they were like, oh man, me too. Gosh, this happened to me. And I'd be like, oh, wow. Whew. Okay. They were just like, oh, okay, well, I'm sorry. That sounds like it was really hard, and just to have that reflective experience with people. Yeah.
The resounding impact that I have from what you've just shared then is this sense of compassion that you now have for yourself, which I imagine didn't exist throughout all of those years that you were drinking.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of like, it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. Like, that's a hard statement, but it's a very true statement, in the sense of like, I cannot go and change any of those things, and I was, a victim of my circumstance and of my knowledge and of my experience at the time. Yeah, I can beat myself up about that. I should have known better, but I didn't. So what am I going to do with that? And all of that is doing is not providing me with the space to be able to move forward and then help others. If I'm not looking after myself, and if I'm in that state, then how am I going to break the generational cycles of shame and trauma in my family? Like, how am I going to show up for my kids and do things different, or for my clients, or, have an impact in the world which is meaningful? So it's often that thing that we think, if we forgive ourselves, there's some sort of, it's selfish, or there's something, but it's not. It's like, when you can be compassionate to yourself, then you can show compassion to others, and that's where we heal, the very wounded world that we live in. And you see people different, right? You know, when you're in recovery, it's you walk through the world looking at people in a different way, because it's like, wow, I have no idea what you've been through. You know, so yeah, it's a nicer way to live, right? With compassion.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Can we change gears for a moment? I recently saw a post that you shared on Instagram about alcohol use disorder and the danger of having such a black and white rhetoric. So can you elaborate on this for our listeners? Because I feel the same way about labels. And I think, like we shared before, it's each to their own. Everybody's recovery journey is different. And, you know, for me, I identify as an alcoholic. That works for me and that helps to keep me sober. For other people, that doesn't work. Alcohol use disorder is another one of these labels. So I'd love you just to unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah. I completely agree. It's like, it's individual choice. So alcoholism hasn't been a diagnostic term since the 1980s, but it's still very much used in kind of common language, alcoholic, addict. And it tends to put people in two camps. So you either are or you aren't. So you either are an addict or an alcoholic, or you're not, you're a normal drinker. And what we know about kind of alcohol use disorder or addiction is that it's progressive and it's a scale. So it's not you either are, you aren't. It's where are you on that spectrum? And the difficulty with the kind of old school language around, you know, alcoholism is it tends to lead people to only getting help when they are at rock bottom. So it's only like, I have to be that bad, I have to be that stereotype, or I have to be that type of person, or I'm a normal drinker and I should be able to moderate it. You know, if we can change that narrative to start talking about the spectrum, where are you on the spectrum? You know, and I mean, it's written in what's so frustrating, it's written in documentation. You know, in the World Health Organization, they talk about, you know, alcohol use being from hazardous to harmful to dependency. So they talk about it as a spectrum. And there's different kind of categorization. Even when you do, any of the kind of tests online, it will be like, how many of these do you identify with? And the more people that can, because we all have that, right? We all have that moment where we're like, I'm not sure that this is right. And if there was at that interjecture, okay, well, being, not drinking's fine. It's actually quite nice. Don't worry about it. Do you know what I mean? It's fine. Like, life's not going to end, it's actually quite good. And you'll be okay. And, and have that positive sort of sobriety messaging going on, then we're going to help people to, when they've got so much more agency over their own experience. It's like, from where I was at different points in my drinking journey, I had different amounts of agency and different, that kind of early intervention. If someone had said to me at that point, like, don't worry, come, it's fine, you don't have to do this anymore, I would never have got to that dark place. And so, and I mean, if it's something that feels empowering to you, then great. If it's not, then how do you describe it? And I had that with a client, she'd been to treatment, her family called her an alcoholic. She'd been to treatment 3 times, and she just, it didn't make sense to her. And so on our first call, I was like, okay, she was sort of saying, so I'm an alcoholic, but she just was kind of, you could see in her face, she was like questioning it, not sure. And I was like, okay, I'm curious, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but, you don't seem 100% convinced about that label. And she was like, oh no, not really. That's what everyone says I am. I was like, okay, well, what do you say? How do you describe it? And she was like, well, I have a problematic relationship with alcohol. I was like, okay, well, that's where we're at then, and then she was like, you could see, it was just like, okay, take off that shackles of that, that thing, and just feel comfortable in my own experience. And yeah, so it's really important for me that people can choose, not be labelled, but choose what labels feel or what language feels empowering to them.
Absolutely. And I think if somebody's going to be more receptive to treatment by not using a particular label, then that's the right path for them.
100%. Yeah.
On the flip side, for somebody who is able to identify, like you just said, be empowered by that, then that's the path they choose. And again, it's not a one size fits all. Thank you so much for explaining that a little bit more for us. Okay, Mandy, can you tell me now, what are the best parts about being sober for you?
Oh gosh. Well, I think when I really sort of bore down into why I wanted to make this choice, what was my why? It was around motherhood and showing up as a parent that I wanted to be. I'd never in my dreams imagined that I would be that type of mum, and I just didn't want to be that mum. So yeah, it's the relationship I have with my kids, that I'm more patient, that I'm actually more fun. Like, because I was controlling alcohol so much, I become really uptight, and I'm much more silly now. I don't really care about many things, and that's in itself a brilliant thing, because I had so little confidence in myself. I just was so ashamed of myself. Yeah, just, I don't know, connecting, those moments of pure serenity when you connect with your experience, just the light, the breeze. I'm just looking out the window now, and just being able to be connected to the outside world and not be kind of numbed out from it. And and it's given me a career, right, as well. So. Like, who knew? I never in a million years would have thought that I'd write 2 books, or had a podcast, or become a coach, or found, a job which I feel I'm good at and is meaningful to me. None of that would have happened if I'd carried on drinking.
So. I don't know any other sort of life experience where their lives change so drastically than getting into recovery. It's just incredible. Like, the possibilities truly are endless.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So what do you do today to maintain your recovery?
Well, I stay connected with my community. So I have, lots of friends who are in recovery. I try to look after myself, not get too stressed out, and just keep my life as simple as possible, really, because the biggest trigger is stress, I think. So
and being able to tune in and know when that's happening, and like you just shared at the top of the show, you had too much on your plate, you pared it back, like being able to be really in tune with how you are responding to life in any given moment. I know for me that was a really difficult thing for a really long time, but now just slowing down in recovery, using things like meditation just to connect back to self and really check in each and every day, journaling as well, as you mentioned, how am I feeling today, and then being able to adapt based off that is really powerful.
I think it has to come before everything else, really, and that doesn't mean that I neglect other areas of my life, but my life has to be driven or designed to protect my sobriety. So that's, luckily I've done enough work to have that insight of, like, no matter what, nothing will jeopardize it, even if it's my the things I really want to do. It's just like, it has to come first, and that's that overwhelm, that stress, that anxiety, that taking on too much. Those are all huge red flags for me.
I'm exactly the same. Now, I love to finish off asking each of my guests this final question, and that is, Mandy, what are your 3 non-negotiables for living happy, joyous, and free in recovery?
Continued support. So be that, therapy, groups, friendships, fellowship, looking after my nervous system. So yeah, stress, doing exercise, eating well, sleeping. Those are lots of things. And yeah, never drinking again. That's just, it's like, it's not an option. And that's,
That's a pretty solid list. Yeah, I'll take some of those, absolutely. Mandy, you are such a wealth of knowledge and you've got such a powerful story. I can't thank you enough for sharing your time with us today. If our listeners would like to find you, where should they go?
Mostly I hang out on Instagram, Mandy Manners Coach, or my website is mandymanners.com, or you can read one of our books. So we've got 2 books. There's Love Yourself Sober, which is a self-care guide to busy mums. It's all around motherhood. And the second book is Love Your Sober Year, which is seasonal self-care. So it's all around connecting with the natural kind of cycles of life and how that can support our recovery.
Brilliant. I'll make sure that I pop all of that information in the episode show notes. Mandy, we say here on the show that when we recover loudly, no one needs suffer in silence. I can't thank you enough for being part of this story, sharing your story and really making a difference in the world. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
A big thank you for tuning in today. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button and leaving a review. Every review helps this podcast become more discoverable, meaning more people can hear these stories of strength and hope. Together, we will continue to remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction. Remember to reach out to those you care about, and I'll see you next time.